On Sunday morning, Eva Liliana was found dead in the bathroom of Coppel, Plaza de Armas, in the historic center of Durango. She worked there. The state prosecutor's office released this video. You can see Liliana's alleged killer enter the store, walk through the aisles, and then leave.
You won't believe what happened to a Coppel worker when she decided to take a break from her workday. And if you're not from Mexico, Coppel is a department store. Eva Liliana Montelongo Hernandez had no idea that going to the restroom would cost her life, as just a few minutes after she was seen entering, she was found with no vital signs and clear signs of abuse. Once the security cameras were reviewed, they noticed the presence of a very suspicious individual, apparently intoxicated or under the influence of illicit substances. This criminal carried out his atrocious crime as easily as taking candy from a child. With so many people coming in and out of that business, his presence on the premises didn't seem relevant. Indeed, each of the workers kept to their tasks and not even Eva herself realized that someone was watching her closely. Once the case became public, the community of Durango in Mexico quickly spoke out through demonstrations and social media campaigns for justice to be done, especially after the authorities showed signs of wanting to downplay the events, including the very store whose interior served as the crime scene. Against all odds, the day after this sad event, they opened their doors to the public as if nothing had happened.
Last night, dozens of people demonstrated right outside the store, but what started as a vigil to place candles in memory of Liliana turned into a fire. They broke windows, set fires. Part of the place, the flames spread quickly, but there were already firefighters deployed to prevent it from getting worse. People wanted to show their dissatisfaction because the store opened the morning after the murder.
Although nothing could bring Eva Liliana back to life, evidently, her loved ones and the general inhabitants, as well as feminist collectives, took on the task of ensuring her name would not be easily forgotten. Lily, as she was affectionately called, was originally from a small town in Durango called Plan de Ayala. There she was raised by her parents and grandmother in a very welcoming home where the love of the family was never lacking. At the time of the attack, the woman was 35 years old, still living with her parents, and was a fundamental part of the household to keep it afloat. As she had been working at the Coppel department store for 4 years, she had become a main support of the house. She traveled a little over half an hour to get from Plan de Ayala to the historic center of Durango, where the branch to which she lent her services was located. Everyone knew her as a cheerful person. She liked to have friends, socialize with her co-workers, and given her cheerful and kind personality, she was very good at her job. Considering the popularity of that store, dozens of customers came and went to take advantage of the credit system that asked for few requirements. That's why they were used to seeing so many people from whom hardly anyone, let's say, stood out. Thus, a day before tragedy struck the Montelongo Hernandez family, Liliana enjoyed her last dinner with her loved ones. That was on May 11, 2024. She went to sleep peacefully that night. She then spent a few hours on social media, uploaded photos, shared even funny content, and then fell asleep, but not before setting the alarm to start her routine on time. The next morning, she woke up as usual to have breakfast, take a bath, and then embark on her 35-minute journey to her job. She had to arrive at 11 in the morning to start her activities, and she did. Everything seemed normal. Liliana had no reason to fear any male person. She didn't even have a jealous ex-boyfriend to worry about. Much less did she have enemies or anyone who wanted to harm her. In fact, she was a very beloved woman, as I tell you, in her surroundings, in her area. So immediately upon her arrival, then she said good morning to her colleagues. It was shaping up to be a very busy shift due to the flow of people. There were those who came to make pending payments, those who bought appliances, clothes, and so on. As well as there were always customers who just wandered around the aisles looking at electronic items to ask for information or simply to see some purchase options. Lily, for her part, was always kind to everyone. It was around 1 in the afternoon when the suspect entered the store. He went largely unnoticed. Apparently, it was just another customer walking through the aisles of Coppel. However, in retrospect, and upon closer examination of the videos extracted from the security cameras, today it can be affirmed that this young man was not interested in any item from the store. His attention was focused on absolutely nothing except one person, and that person was Eva Liliana. Lily was just going about her daily activities. She never knew she was being closely watched. For her, all the attendees had the sole purpose of buying something. It had been 2 hours since her shift started, and it was right after this guy walked in when she decided to go to the restroom and take a break from the hustle and bustle of work. Unbeknownst to her, the employee was giving the man the opportunity to do what he had planned. Away from co-workers and customers, she practically paved the way for the criminal to his heartbreaking purpose on a silver platter. Shortly after the worker went to the restroom, one of her colleagues also decided to go. She found it strange that the woman took so long to return to her work post, but it was even stranger when the bathroom door opened. It wasn't her colleague who came out, but a young man with his face covered with a black garment. The woman quickly concluded that the situation was very unusual, so she chose to peek in to see if everything was okay. Unfortunately, nothing could have prepared her for the tragic discovery. There was Eva Liliana, with no vital signs and signs of violence on her body. In addition, she was not wearing her uniform pants. The worker was in shock. That young man she had seen leave seconds before was responsible, however. By that time, he was no longer in the store. Not really understanding what was happening, she could barely react to notify the rest of her colleagues. She thought that through the radio she could communicate to stop the guy with the covered face, but nothing could be done since he had hurriedly escaped from the place. Subsequently, after the failed attempt to stop him, they called the police. The truth was that nothing could be done for Miss Montelongo, but with the last glimmer of hope, the paramedics were called to attempt to revive her. Once there, they only confirmed that she no longer had vital signs. Her body was cruelly injured. One could almost assure the cause of her death, but they had to wait for the forensic analysis, which, surprisingly, were ready that same day that it was mechanical asphyxiation. However, the marks on her neck were not the only ones present. She had 11 wounds on her face and another 15 on the rest of her body. Without a doubt, her suffering before losing that will to live was inhumane, especially due to the terrible act of intimate abuse. When the family was notified, they couldn't believe such news. How was it possible if they had just shared breakfast that same morning? Worse yet, neither his parents nor his sister had any idea who could have been capable of doing something like this. As I mentioned earlier, Liliana had no enemies, no current or former partners who might hold a grudge against her. On the contrary, she was a woman completely dedicated to her family, to the well-being of her parents, grandmother, and sisters.
Lily was a very beautiful person to me, because if she had any problems, she kept them to herself, and she treated me the best.
Infamous. He didn't know what he did to my daughter. She was such a good person. She didn't mess with anyone. She didn't even have a boyfriend. Why did they do that to her?
Without any kind of suspicion about the identity of the culprit, all they could do was trust that the store's security cameras would provide the first clues, so the authorities began to analyze them immediately. Thus, they noticed that the suspect arrived at the business around 1 in the afternoon, spent an hour and a half inside, and then was seen leaving with what appeared to be a black garment covering his face, the same time it was said Lily had her life taken away. Notably, no relatives of the Montelongo or Hernandez families could identify the young man. In reality, he was a stranger, one that not even Lily could have identified. Now doubts about his identity and the motive of this event plagued the minds of everyone involved in the case. Soon the news spread throughout Durango, especially the image of the suspect as well as the alleged state of the same under the effects of substances, a detail that caught the attention of public opinion, considering that this data was affirmed by only watching the store's videos. In turn, while the inhabitants were making a fuss on social networks, the first clue that would apparently give the identity of the suspect emerged. It was nothing more and nothing less than the location of the victim's cell phone. Surprisingly, and against all odds, it had turned on almost 24 hours after the event. This gave some locations where fortunately there were security cameras whose images gave the first glimpses of the alleged perpetrator, who was a young man with a dark complexion with a finger tattooed on his face. Almost immediately, the image of the subject was made public, thus speeding up the process to find his whereabouts. And meanwhile, government authorities began to show their stance on the events. For example, the government secretary Héctor Eduardo Vela Valenzuela wanted to downplay the crime, arguing that it was not a matter of insecurity, but a personal act and perhaps of a passionate nature. This was backed up by the low violence rate recorded in that city, however, far from being supported by the inhabitants. They spoke out on social networks to expose the large number of people walking the streets under the influence of drugs, especially scattered through the streets of downtown, right where the store branch was located. Thus, in the midst of the debate and the feeling of impunity, the authorities came up with the first suspect. It was the young man with the finger tattooed on his face. Once in custody, he was questioned about the May 12th attack as well as how he came into possession of that cell phone. However, to the investigators' surprise, the suspect told a story where he had an alibi for that day. He said he didn't know the victim, also commented he hadn't been at Coppel, but most importantly, he confessed to buying that cell phone from another young man who apparently had stolen it. Although he did everything he could to cooperate with the authorities, only his alibi could be corroborated. He was telling the truth and unfortunately did not know the name of the mysterious cell phone seller, who by that time, there was no doubt that the young man in the security cameras was the culprit, but also only this data could hardly lead to him. In addition, the possible suspect had already shown to have nothing to do with the crime, so the investigation was again as it was at the beginning, that is, without clues. However, an unexpected event completely changed the course of this. It was a phone call through which key information was provided for the resolution of the case. It was a young man who claimed to personally know Eva's attacker. According to his story, they were co-workers, but beyond that, he claimed to have evidence of the crime thanks to a mysterious black bag that, for some reason, had come into his possession. When the detectives and the complainant exchanged information, they determined a meeting point, specifically a restaurant called Marisqueria La Quinta, where apparently both he and the suspect from the videos worked. It was located very close to the branch in the store, and once there, the first thing he did was hand over the black bag. Surprisingly, it contained Liliana's red-stained pants and her identification. And that's how they finally came face to face with someone who did have important information. And it was just a matter of a couple of questions for all these totally chilling details to gradually start to come to light. The first thing they discovered was the subject's real name, Dante Yair, a 20-year-old who worked as a waiter in that same restaurant. Maris wanted the fifth. Apparently, he led a normal life like any boy his age. 2 years of seniority at work backed up his alleged responsibility and honest lifestyle to a certain extent. He had never shown any warning behavior until recently when his personality gradually began to change. Suddenly, he was no longer a young music lover and drawing enthusiast. Now he could be seen consuming alcoholic beverages excessively and ingesting narcotics. Perhaps it was all due to the bad relationship he had at home with his family, problems that ended up leaving him on the street. It was said that before the crime, Dante Yair had been homeless for some time.
With a 20-year-old guy who is kicked out of his house, who has a terrible history of drug addiction and alcoholism that I believe he doesn't even know what he did. Regrettable. So it was easy for him, as I said one day, a criminal in Mexico City said, "Hey, I kill women because it's so easy to kill women in Mexico that nothing happens." No, it's already happening. This guy is going to get at least 45 years of sentence. And it's always what I've stated, it's not the sentence that the judge imposes, it's that it is carried out and it will surely be carried out.
The witness not only handed over the culprit on a silver platter, but also recounted in great detail what happened that day. Dante was supposed to arrive for the night shift to wait tables, but his presence in the restaurant attracted more attention than usual. To start with, he had arrived late, but instead of paying attention to his duties, he seemed to be quite disturbed. In addition to being drunk, he was hitting his head, repeating the phrase, "I messed up, I messed up." The truth was that the waiter was feeling extremely bad, so his superior suggested he should leave.
To give you an idea, he couldn't even concentrate, but contrary to leaving the
place, he stayed in the bar area lamenting something. Something that at that moment nobody knew what he had done, the atrocity he had committed. After some time, he informed his companions he needed to leave to sell a cell phone. And that's when he wanted to get rid of the black bag, which he gave to one of his companions to take care of. The young man, unknowingly, was accepting the damning evidence of a criminal, but he discovered it as soon as Dante left the place. Within minutes, the waiters at the seafood restaurant figured it out. They knew about the recent event at Coppel, and thanks to the news, they knew the full name of the victim, Eva Liliana Montelongo Hernandez, whose identification was found in none other than the dark bag. There was no doubt about it, the waiter looked guilty as sin. Subsequently, the call was made to the police officers to be able to hand over the evidence as well as to provide all possible information about the perpetrator. Among this information was also the location where the subject used to spend the nights. Remembering that he had been kicked out of his home a while ago, he was practically leading a homeless life, sleeping on the pavement of the streets without having anywhere to go. As soon as they could, the uniformed officers met at the place where he was regularly seen, and finally on May 13th of 2024, he was arrested.
The Attorney General's Office of Durango reported the capture of Dante Yair N., 20 years old, identified as the alleged perpetrator of the femicide of Eva Liliana Montelongo Hernandez, 35 years old, who was found dead in the bathrooms of a Coppel store located in the center of the Durango capital.
For better or worse, however the government acted with respect to the crime, the fact is that the arrest was carried out practically the next day after the events. All thanks to the call from the restaurant employee, as I was telling you, and now yes, we can say that the authorities did their job. Dante was transferred to Social Reintegration Center No. 1, and a statement was immediately released detailing the capture process. However, the details of how and what reaction the detainee had were kept confidential. However, despite the quick response from the authorities, the people who were closely following the case were not satisfied, especially with the actions of the store where the crime occurred, as no one could believe what they did the next day. That is, as if it were any incident. They only cordoned off access to the crime scene, the restroom, and opened their doors to the general public, thus giving the opportunity for the evidence to be contaminated for some reason, with so many people coming in because, in addition, the words used in the statement they published were not exactly the most appropriate. This is because they treated the events as a death instead of a murder, and perhaps in an attempt to minimize the situation and go a little unnoticed, and that people would not stop going. But to the misfortune of the department store managers, their actions did not minimize. On the contrary, they aroused the fury of dozens of people who decided to stand outside the facilities. It was supposed to be a peaceful demonstration. They started with candles and banners, as well as flowers and images of the victim. All obviously with the intention of honoring their memory, but as the hours passed, no one could prevent the tempers from heating up among the attendees. Mainly, there was a feeling of helplessness and outrage at the minimal respect the store showed to its deceased employee. That's when things started to get out of control.
And with no response from the authorities, the group kept growing. The number of participants was so high that the presence of preventive elements from the Capitol Public Security Directorate was necessary to safeguard the place. Likewise, it caused this hardworking woman from Durango who lost her life last Sunday. At about 9 p.m., I tell you that the group of protesters began to commit acts of vandalism against property. The demands of the people gathered in the historic center did not cease, so the dissatisfied during the protest threw objects inside when the windows were broken. This caused something, a heart of fire inside. Fortunately, it didn't get any worse.
Only in this way, after the demonstration, Coppel did not open its doors again until several days later. The eyes of the public opinion were not distracted even for a second. They wanted to see Dante and their trial behind bars, and just seeing their faces was enough for the community.
To become even more enraged.
Even when it was confirmed that Eva indeed had no relation with this sick person, with this monster. She was just a woman chosen at random to satisfy the most sadistic desires of a man capable of violating the female body in the worst way. The mere idea of losing one's life at work, where one is supposed to feel a sense of security, unleashed a series of quite strong comments. For instance, one that stood out in the march whose message alluded to the fact that Coppel can kill you. Where had the safety of this store gone? That's what the rest of the people were wondering. And not just the safety of the store, the safety of the government, the police.
Where is the security? Where is it? How was I supposed to find her when she got off work? Because I thought that on the street. I never thought she would do that at her own job. Just to tell him that he doesn't know what he did to her and may God forgive him, that's all.
At the same time, from the Social Reintegration Center number 1, Dante was analyzing what was best for him. Basically, they had caught him red-handed thanks to the security cameras. In addition, the account of his co-worker along with the incriminating evidence did not paint a future where his freedom was in his hands. He was soon formally charged with murder, and along with his confession, he waived having a trial with each step in the protocol, instead opting for a shortened trial whose purpose was to speed up the judicial process. However, this can only be granted if all parties agree, especially the accused. Naturally, to achieve this agreement, he had to plead guilty beforehand, so the remaining task was only to determine the years of sentence, which could even be agreed upon in advance. And so, incredibly, just 3 days had passed since the crime when Dante was already facing trial to receive the punishment corresponding to his actions. A judge listened in great detail to the entire macabre scene orchestrated by the defendant, from the moment he entered the store to the moment when, after selecting his victim, he proceeded to stalk and then attack. And so it was that Eva's life faded away in his hands, which surrounded her neck until her breath was cut off. Unfortunately, that moment when the worker had decided to go to the restroom had been the key point for the crime to unfold, as Dante saw no better opportunity than that. Apparently, his only purpose was intimate abuse, however. When the victim showed resistance, this individual subdued her to the point of leaving her immobile and then unconscious due to the heavy blows he inflicted. Subsequently, when he achieved his goal, he took the woman's red-stained pants and placed them on his face to avoid being caught on camera. It was then that upon leaving the restroom, he ran into Emma's companion, who later discovered the lifeless body.
Given the severity of the case, through a 72-hour abbreviated trial where the man accepted the charges, a judge sentenced him to 59 years, 11 months, and 29 days in prison for femicide and imprisonment.
The nearly 60 years of prison were not his only punishment. In addition, he was fined 469,000 Mexican pesos as well as a damage repair of 1,259,940 pesos. On the other hand, this guy said nothing in the face of such a sentence. Instead, he accepted it, emphasizing that he was giving up his right to a trial by jury. Unfortunately, it was never known for certain what the real motive for his attack was. Dante and Eva were two strangers. He frequented illicit substances with a decadent life, and she was a hardworking family woman with a whole future ahead of her. But the most regrettable thing is that the one who lost was the one who owed nothing, feared nothing, and certainly did not deserve such a sad and regrettable death as she had.
If you like this video, remember that every Monday on Pepe Misterio's channel interviews are uploaded at 2 in the afternoon Mexico City time, and if you haven't seen them, put on YouTube a Pepe Misterio podcast and you get a kind of playlist at the top.